Hi, everybody. Welcome to my second live stream. We're doing an after show for the Non Sequitur show that just took place. There is a link to that live stream in the description if you would like to go and have a look. Of course, after you listen to our fabulous conversation, we just had a conversation regarding the questions that no Christian can answer video. That was a compilation that was done by a group of atheist YouTubers, myself and Paulogia included, who are here in this hangout. And we addressed the questions one by one. It was a 2-hour-long hangout, and it was an interesting conversation, but we felt like we couldn't really delve as deep into some of the questions as we would have liked to, based solely on time constraint, because there was 17 people in that hangout, but it went as amazingly smoothly as it could go, considering the amount of people that were involved. So I'll introduce the people that are here with me. So I have JMD Apologetics, and I don't have the links in the description right now, but after the show, I will put the links to each person's individual channel if they provide them to me in the description. So we have JMD Apologetics, who has a channel, and he is a Christian. And I have Michael Zimmerman here with me, who is a myriad of things that I didn't absorb well enough to explain to you. So I'll let him explain himself once we start discussing. And I have Ocean Keltoi and also Paulogia. So I would like to first go to JMD because he was messaging me during the live stream discussing some of the issues that he had with some of the apologetics that he heard that he felt like he could have addressed better. So I think that's a fair place to start. So would you like to start off, JMD, with just some of the things that you felt could have been addressed better?
Yeah, the Germanic pagan on the show, who I'll probably become friends with because he seems like a pretty nice person. I think he knew the apologetics, or at least had good answers, and he seemed to come from saying, for the sake of argument, let me pretend to be a Christian and answer these as a Christian would. And I found his answers to be a little, if I was a skeptic or non-believer, I would probably find his answers a little bit more compelling. If I'm free to, which is your question, of course.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So that would be Ocean that you were referring to. Is there a specific question that you felt as though he addressed better than the apologists that we had on to address the questions?
Trying to think here. Your question for sure, I think.
That was a hard one, right?
I agreed with her. So that's
well, you brought up the penny scenario. So what was
right? The point of that, I apologize for kind of bungling that a little bit, Shannon, is because it seemed like when I was trying to put that forward, I meant it to go towards Heather, but you answered instead. And
yeah, I'm prone to that. Sorry, I think everything's for me.
So I meant it for Heather, but you answered instead. But in that, I realized it's like, oh, I kind of screwed up kind of the representation of it. So I tried to amend it, and that didn't work either. And Ozzy pointed out in the side chat a point about it where there's a conflation between convinced and believe that I was doing in the wording of the question. I was just trying to get down to like the doxastic aspect of it, where can you actually choose your positions? So putting that to Heather in that with the pennies what I was attempting to do was get her out of the whole truth point, because she was in a mindset where she's talking about the truth of the matter, and it's so obviously the truth of the matter to her that you're not going to be able to convince her any other way, and the fact that you can't see it is just you denying the truth. So it's like, all right, well, let's try and get away from something that is a claim around what you see as the truth and do something that's a little bit more open, which would be the number of pennies in a jar.
Yeah, I think that was the problem. Is good. People have heard that also. Matt Dillahunty's given that so many times with jelly beans in a jar or pennies in the jar that
Right.
They've heard that so many times they're automatically associating that with a whole different argument. Like if you might have said, "Hey, let's all agree. Can we agree that the head of NASA's middle name is Charles?"
Right.
We don't even
that
know
would be a better one as well, or like my car is red or something like that.
Sure. And she actually went. I actually kind of wanted to let her finish. At one point, she was saying, "Are you sitting or standing?" to me, and I actually wanted to, challenge her on that. I'm like, okay, I know I'm sitting. Great. I would have loved to let her finish that one, because it was like, okay, I know I'm sitting. Could I convince myself that I'm standing?
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to let her hang herself with that. I forget why it didn't work out, but
because we were focused on the dragon on our head. Craig wanted to take that dragon to the garage.
he was like, I want to do it.
Yeah, so JMD actually did a response video. He did a live stream. Then he had a couple of other people on, and he addressed our question along with inspiring philosophy and deflating atheism. And
a guy on Instagram, I know. He's done a couple videos actually for my channel.
Oh, okay, cool. And so there was a few people that were in there. Could you maybe, since Paulogia and I are here, this might be a good opportunity for us to kind of suss this out, because our question's a good one for the people that are in this room, I think. And so do you have a response that you feel that you could present to us?
Yeah, I think it comes down to ethics of belief. When are you what? I first I would have to ask: are we able to choose what? Not what would convince us, but what are the standards of convincing, or what would convince us in the first place? Sort of like the famous Descartes quote, "I think, therefore I am." He was a foundationalist. He thought that you had to have beyond any doubt for your epistemology. So he doubted every physical reality, anything outside the mind. So he was an idealist, of course. And he worked from there, and he said, at bottom, I know for certain I am a thinking thing, because I can't be nothing at that, since, nothing has no properties and so on.
Right.
Well, I think epistemology is where we should first tackle this question, I think.
Okay, so when you say epistemology,
how we come to know things and so on.
How we come to know things.
Yeah.
All right. So could you elaborate that on that a little bit for me? And I'll give you a reason why, because I used the example in the live stream that I could have somebody who's, for all intents and purposes, of like mind. Like we've gone through life and come to the same conclusions about everything up until this point. Like, we think alike. So let's say, for example, me and Paul think alike on a lot of things. He could be sitting right next to me. You could present both of us the same evidence in real time, and the two of us could come to different conclusions based on the same evidence, which is why I was arguing that this isn't a request for evidence or critique of the quality of evidence provided. It's a question ultimately of what mechanisms allow somebody to change their mind and be convinced of something. And is that within your control? Do you feel that it's within your control to change your mind?
By mechanisms, what do you mean by that? Physical, like mechanisms of a car or so on? Because I would answer that a decision would just be a basic action and so on. Now, whether we have free will, that's a whole different question. But if there were such a thing as free will,
actually, this doesn't. That was my part of a quibble with the way that was ending. Is I don't even think it is related to free will. It's actually related to exactly what you said. It's our epistemologies.
Okay.
How do we what leads us to be convinced of something or not is not necessarily free will.
Oh, I thought the question was on free will.
Maybe Shannon thinks it.
Yeah, we have a difference of opinion there. I think Paul and I.
Okay.
I think the Christian would be applying it to free will if they believe it is a choice.
Right. And I was going to clarify something here, right? So for a lot of theists, it just is the case that belief includes their faith, right? Which for some theists is an act. Right? There are theists that have these sort of holistic views of faith, such that they're acting it out. And so there might be some conflating between the two, beliefs and faith. And I think that's why there might have been some folks talking past each other towards the end there, is that the lady that was defending theism at the end, and I don't recall her name, might have been taking the question, can you choose your beliefs, as the question, can you choose to act these things out, like act your faith out? And in that case, for her, if that is the case, that she takes belief to be an act, then of course she can choose her acts, right?
Now, can we define what belief is so that we're all on the same page?
I think that was something that wasn't done in the Hangout that I wish had been done. There's a lot of maybe we should define that term that needed to take place there, but we weren't able really to get to it because there was only enough time for like one or two back and forth, so we couldn't really suss anything out. But I guess Shannon and Paul, what do you guys mean by believe when you're asking that question?
I'll defer to Paul for this one because I feel like I ran roughshod over the live stream.
I have my dog barking, Shan.
Oh no, Bella. Okay, so when you say belief, I think ultimately it's that you're invested in something and hold it to be true.
Okay. I would just say it's a proposition that one holds that could be false or true.
Okay, so you can hold a multiple amount of propositions that could be false or could be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a belief.
Specifically, you want to say that somebody believes something if they hold a positive propositional attitude, right? So take the proposition God exists, for instance. It's the subject is going to believe that if they hold the positive view of that proposition.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you think brings them to that? Do you think that is within their control, which I think is the ultimate question? Is it within your control whether you can hold a positive belief for that proposition? Is that something that you can say, even though I feel that I'm not compelled, I'm going to actively choose this. So for me, it would be God in this instance, which I did believe in and had a and tried to continue to believe in, but could no longer do it. It literally slipped away from me and I no longer had the choice to believe. So that from my perspective, that was out of my control. It wasn't an active choice of mine. I fought for that to not be the case. So can you see from my perspective, I would have wanted to choose to believe that, but I no longer, if I was going to be honest with myself, had the option.
Now, can I ask this question?
Of course. Any question you'd like?
Yeah. When you say Christians, now I'm not saying everyone on the stream would say this, but typically when I come across atheists who comment on my videos, tell me I believe something without evidence and assent to that blindly. So essentially, I may be believing something that I may not be convinced on a logical level, but I believe as a basic, proper belief, like I exist. Because to be frank, the proposition that one exists, of course, I'll get into realism and idealism, but at the same time, when someone believes blindly, would that be choosing to believe something that may not be compelling on an intellectual level or so on, or deceive themselves, or be delusional in that case?
But would that person not still be convinced? If they're not self-deceiving, then they are convinced, right?
On what level?
Well, that's the question. Like, that's why we're saying every person has different levels for that. And so, our general question is, we have level X, and you, John, are convinced at a level that is different. I don't want to say lower or higher, but there was a different. You were convinced by the same evidence, or by the same. Let's assume we all know all the evidence that exists. You were convinced by it, and we were not. And so, in terms of levels, it's just that there are different standards that we have for that. So the question is, are we accountable because we have different standards?
Well, I would have to ask, what are your standards and how did you come to those conclusions and so on?
But is that, my question back to you, is that relevant in any way? Like, forget it. We're not even talking about me. We're talking about some guy down the street.
Okay. So are you saying that we can't choose the standards? Well, for something to be true or false, I'm sure we would all agree that truth is correspondence to reality in that sense.
I actually, that's a good definition. I'm willing to go with that, as long as you're conceding that it's a spectrum and not a binary.
Could you unpack that? What you mean by that?
Sure. So something can be more true than others. So just say
okay, most probable and so on. Sure.
Yeah. And okay. For example, some statements are more true than others, even if they're not absolutely true.
Okay,
Like
so
to say that the Earth is round is not precisely true, but it's relatively true.
yeah, spherical.
Yeah, so example. So I just think the truth is a spectrum, and it's a degree to which something contorts, to which a statement conforms to reality. So there's a degree measure there.
Can we hold flat earthers accountable for their beliefs then?
Well, in a way, they've been so that's another thing. So they've been convinced by a certain level of evidence, or they've been unconvinced of the roundness by a certain level of evidence. So again, is it their fault? So obviously, we could argue all day. Well, they haven't looked at enough evidence, or they're not considering it their weight. Blah blah blah. But the question really is, did they choose the level to which they would be convinced or not? Like, is a gullible person
accountable for their gullibility?
Accountable for their being gullible?
Well, if they had the resources and if they had the opportunity to study the subject more, but didn't want to, then I would say yeah. Because I would say
let's flip it to then to worldview. So where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought. My bad. Shane.
Well, there's a whole theory of justification called the ontological theory of justification, in which somebody's justified in holding a proposition if they've met some sort of epistemic responsibility, some sort of duty or responsibility that they have with regard to seeking out defeaters for that proposition, such that they can't hold it anymore. It's called defeasibility, right?
Right.
So this is a normative claim, right? What does it mean to meet these responsibilities or meet these obligations? This is going to be subjective. This is going to vary from person to person. And so there are people who hold this idea of epistemic responsibility that just varies across a continuum.
I think we would all agree that if we jump off a building, typically you're going to fall to the ground and probably die. So I won't say that's subjective.
No, but there are some propositions, right, that are non-evidential, that where this would come into play, right? You would agree with that?
Yeah. Essentially, it comes down to ethics of belief, I think.
In what way?
What do you mean by ethics of belief? That's a confusing statement to me.
Yeah, sorry. Whether you're justified in assenting to a certain belief or proposition.
Okay, so do you feel that atheists don't have justification?
Well, first, what do you mean by atheism?
I do not believe in I can only speak towards myself, because holy smokes, let's not get into the definition of atheism argument, because I'll shut down the stream. Right now, I'll do it. So
if you say what is the definition of atheism into a mirror 3 times, Steve appears behind you.
I know, let's not invoke Steve.
Stop it. It's already been said twice. Don't do it.
If you say it, he will come. But anyway, yeah, so in my particular instance, I do not believe there is a God. However, I am open to the possibility that there is one. But in my present state, I do not believe that there is.
Cool. So if someone is not open, then obviously they are not willing to change their mind, I think. But of course, the question would come down to, are they able to choose if they're willing or not willing to
Right, but I just said I was open to the possibility. So did I have a choice in becoming an atheist? Did I choose to become an atheist?
Well, did you assent to atheism being true?
I don't know that I would claim that atheism is ultimately true, because I admitted that that the fact that there could be a God is within the realm of possibility. I don't think it's probable.
Yeah, I agree. Most likely true.
Well, here's my thing on both sides of that. If you're talking about falsifiable versus provable, that's the problem with God in a nutshell. That's why we have this huge discussion. You can't falsify God.
Oh, I completely disagree.
And you can't prove it.
How could you falsify God?
You can falsify God.
Yeah,
you can't falsify the creator of the universe. You can't falsify a God. You can falsify certain gods. You can falsify gods as described in scriptures, but you can't falsify a creator of the universe if such a being exists.
So if the universe was eternal, would it need a creator?
No.
If it wouldn't, but we can't say if the universe is eternal. We don't know that the answer to that question.
Well, okay, for the sake of argument, if we knew for a fact that the universe was eternal, would you need a creator?
No, because eternal implies that it was here all the time.
Cool. So therefore, by definition, a creator would not exist, or at least would not be responsible for the universe being.
So you're defining God as a.
Well, that would be the creator wouldn't exist. Yes.
Yeah.
That's how you would falsify the creator.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
Or if you can show attributes to be self-contradictory and so on.
Like
But people
doing a philosophical falsification, such as if I do this with the Trinity a lot, where I'll say that the Trinity is incoherent.
I don't want to go down that road, but
Right. Well, I mean, for this as an example, I'll say that the Trinity is incoherent, and then we'll have a conversation about how, like, whether or not the Trinity can be described in a way that is justified. And my position is that because the Trinity cannot be described in a way that is justified, Christianity is false because they're holding an incoherent ideology. Or at least one that's logical.
Maybe not so much. If you say you can't define the Trinity, then it won't necessarily be incoherent. I think you would just not have the idea of what
that the definition provided is incoherent.
Oh, okay.
And and maybe that it actually functions in a different way, because I've heard coherent descriptions of the Trinity, but the description that is most often presented, which is the
three
all
persons,
right, that is incoherent, and we go into why it's incoherent. And I think that you probably agree with me, but that image of God would then be falsified under that, because there's a philosophical objection that's really strong to it
to be incoherent and so on. But that's like a whole different conversation.
Well, I think, but that's how you would falsify God. Is okay, well, what's the properties of God? All right, is there an incoherence in the properties that have been offered? And if the answer is yes, well, then we have a falsification.
Yeah,
right. And that's the thing. When you defined God, you defined him as the creator. So there are people that can essentially move the bar, though, right? So you don't need him to have created everything for him to fit the criteria for someone. Maybe not necessarily Christianity as a God, he, she, it, whatever. Right.
And that's what the problem is what is a God?
The definition is malleable.
Right. But
there's a lot of different
goalposts moving.
There's a lot of different definitions that are provided. And I think that
of course, polytheism, theism, deism, and so on.
Right. Like, so if we had a conversation about God.
Gods, though, not or God, but those are their own separate things that could be, whether the proposition of whether there are multiple gods could be falsified or proven, I think.
But
and
JMD,
take that definition alone, and the other guys will be irrelevant. Well, not irrelevant, but at the same time, whether these gods exist would be independent of the other gods and so on. I would probably argue.
Now, JMG, we're way off of I don't want to say at all that, like, who cares if the people asking the question are justified at all in their epistemology? They may have terrible epistemology, but the question is, can you choose it? Can you choose what you believe? Can you choose to believe something you're not convinced of, even if the way you become convinced of something is logically flawed or chemically flawed or any way flawed? Is there something that you can be convinced or not convinced of and yet believe it?
Right.
Well, now I think you switch from epistemology to just a basic proposition.
That's the crux of our question, though.
I know. So, which do you want to? What you
whatever you feel adequately addresses that question.
So presuppositions are that determines what you believe, I think, essentially. But the question would then be pushed back to, can you choose your presuppositions and so on?
Right.
Like you have presuppositional apologetics, which would, I think, show that essentially that you now I'm not gonna argue like a Seitan Brudenke. I think his presuppositional.
Oh, please don't.
Well, I like Jeff.
Better than that, John.
At the same time, Shannon and I had opposite presuppositions to what we came to. We came in with presuppositions, so like I don't know if I buy it.
So if you assent to the proposition that God would be the best presupposition or starting point for all epistemology, then I think essentially then you end up determining your own beliefs in a sense.
So
maybe not necessarily choosing, but at the same time, you ultimately had the core of what you are, you know in the future what you might or might not believe in someone based on your presuppositions, I think.
Right, but that still ultimately comes down to the heuristic framework of that choice. And is that something that's within conscious control? So when I'm approaching something, anything, do I have the ability to make a decision that isn't based on a pre-existing internal mechanism that's based on my experience and things that I've learned, and as you mentioned, presuppositions that I may have, that whole mismatch of things that's inside my head when I approach anything, as objective as I want to and consciously try to be, which is something that I am cognizant of, and it's something that I do try to do, which is one of the reasons I enter these discussions. Am I consciously able to choose what could compel me to change my mind? Or are those aha moments because they happen to you, not because of you?
So that sounds, let me see here. Because of they happen to, or because of you? Well, if one, I think we would all agree that the proposition of God originated in the mind. So I think that is an idea that someone came up with. Again,
sure, that person, but that so still doesn't address ideas,
I think ultimately ideas which become propositions originate in the mind. So I think, therefore I think that is a true statement, by the way. But I think that ends up being a starting point that people can work from.
Right. So, but is your starting point the same as mine, do you think?
Well, do you believe you exist?
I believe I exist, yes.
Then I think we have the same starting point. Now,
okay, after that, then what?
Now, do you agree that the laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction and so on, are true?
Yeah, I don't think that there can be a square circle or a married bachelor. Those, yes, sure.
Cool. So if we agree on that, now I don't think we choose that. I think free will by definition is choosing between the propositions and so on, which I think we would all agree on. You can't necessarily choose that a married bachelor could exist. I don't think that's a belief that most people hold.
But that's not logically possible.
Yeah.
So the rejection of the proposition that God exists is logically possible.
No, not if you show self-contradictory attributes, which would be another proposition that one would have to assent to, whether attributes in God are contradictory or whatnot.
Well, I mean, the ultimate claim of there is or is not a God, right? So the 50-50 shot that there could be a God or there could not, or gods, or there could not be a God.
Well, that would come down to Pascal's wager,
but it's logical
by both sides.
It's logical to say I don't think there is. It's not a contradiction, which is what you were referencing.
Yeah.
At least I don't think it is, to my mind. Could you explain to me why it would be a contradiction?
What? Sorry.
The proposition that there is or is not a God.
Well,
Because I'm confused by the reference, and I still don't understand how it speaks to the mechanism by which we can be convinced.
Like, if the problem of evil is a successful argument, then obviously there can't be an all-good God and an all-powerful God and so on. So
sure,
the other gods that don't have those attributes. Like, so what?
Well, that proposition there would not be able to, I don't think anyone would be able to hold. If your presupposition is that the laws of logic are true, then obviously you can't convince yourself that that type of God will exist.
Okay.
So I think that when obviously the ultimate question comes down to whether God or God does not exist and so on.
Well, but the question we're trying to answer here tonight is, can you believe something you're not convinced of?
I would probably agree with you and say no, but I would at the same time would say that you can choose your presuppositions and epistemology, I think.
We invoked him.
Dun, dun, dun.
Damn it.
So,
So
Steve, what is the definition of atheism?
Michael's in here. Oh my
Steve
goodness!
McRae just manifested out of thin air.
I just hear from Michael, man. I haven't been in a hangout with Michael in ages.
Yeah, I think it's been a couple of years, maybe.
It's been a long time, even though I talk to you like every other day. But,
Just to be fair, by the way, everybody, I'm going to be giving JMD the floor more than anybody else because he is just ridiculously outnumbered in this scenario.
I could be on his side if you want.
Whenever anybody responds,
Would you be a Christian for just one night?
Can I be a JMD apologist?
You can be a JMD advocate, but I will call you out if you are not. If you don't represent him well, Steve, I will not allow your nonsense in my live stream. I will not.
I haven't heard anything too egregious, but
no, I think it's a good conversation so far.
JMD agreed with me that you can't choose to
I think if you ask me, like, I think you ask, can I believe that there's a green dragon on my shoulder? I won't feel if you agree a dragon is a physical thing and has weight, then obviously
I think it's the word of the ability.
Use that because I don't think it's an option to choose in the first place. Because I don't think it's a possibility in the sense
that's
there's a contradiction if you have the property of weight, and weight by definition would put on pressure. If I feel no pressure,
right? So you're not convinced. So you got part of that. You're not whatever mechanisms. You're not convinced. So could you believe it?
If it's not an option, then no.
Okay, so could you believe that there is a yellow cat on your shoulder right now?
No, because I don't think it's an option to believe that. I don't think it's a possible proposition.
Why not?
Why couldn't there be a yellow cat on your shoulder right now?
Because I think it's contradictory, based on laws of logic and so on. If you hold
a yellow cat is contradictory.
What's a contradictory?
No. A yellow cat being on my shoulder right now.
Because I think he means that he would feel the physical property, like
so he's not
there'd be a physiological response.
Right, so he's not convinced. It's not an impossibility though that there could be one.
Well, again, if you hold to the laws of logic as your presuppositions, then there are many things that are not possible.
Which law of logic?
Yeah, and by the way,
I'm saying
that there's a yellow cat on your shoulder.
If the cat on my shoulder would put weight on my shoulder, and I feel no weight on my shoulder, then I think that would be a contradiction right there.
I don't.
But your shoulder could be numb. Like this, physiological reasons, you're not getting the inputs properly.
Well, then would I see a cat on my shoulder? Or are you going to say an invisible yellow cat, which is contradictory?
Well, again, but these are all reasons you wouldn't be convinced, which are great.
But could you convince yourself in spite of those reasons?
I think we'll just call that delusion. Well, I don't think anyone's going to try and convince themselves of that, and I think that would be a loaded question in the first place.
So then you would agree with Paul and Shannon's
concerning a yellow cat on my shoulder, sure.
No, but we're talking about broadly, right? We're talking about choosing beliefs broadly. And we still haven't gotten a straightforward answer to that question, right? Do you think that people can choose their beliefs?
If you're talking about if you can choose something to be true or false, then I think that's obviously out of our reaches. If you're seeking with an open mind and so on, and you accept the presuppositions of laws of logic and so on, then
can I ask JMD a question about that? I am really actually curious about this.
Do it.
And I have been for a while. Why do you have the presupposition of classical logic? I mean, you don't have to be a classical logician. You can actually reject certain laws of logic, and they're not laws for that very reason. They're principles. Even Aristotle didn't agree with the law of excluded middle. And there's other types of multi-valued logics where you have other things than true and false. You have like unknown. You have 3 valued logic systems. The laws of logic only hold true if you hold a classical logic. But why do you happen to particularly presuppose those rules? Do you think there's some kind of hard coding in the universe? Because that makes no sense if it does. Because these laws do not have to be the way they are. They're descriptive.
Well, that's very pragmatic, I think. That's a good question. So prescriptive. So let me ask you this: before there are any minds on the Earth, would it be true that there are no minds on the Earth or humans on the Earth?
That'd be a tautology. Yeah. If there's no minds prior to there being minds, there was no minds. Yeah.
So that would be objectively true, independent of any mind.
I believe objective facts exist.
Oh. I'll agree with you. And I think that should be a presupposition, at least realism in a sense. I think people can argue whether physical reality exists or not, which would.
But what does that do with the laws? What happens? My point is, the laws of logic themselves, we have them descriptive because we see things that, for example, A is always going to be equal to A, right? The law of non-contradiction. We see that we have a proposition. We want to give it the assignment of either true or false, but we can also assign it unknown. We can actually give it 3 values rather than just 2. So the law of excluded middle does not have to hold. There's nothing in the universe that says we must have that particular, quote, law of logic.
Well, would it be true that it could be unknown?
It is. It is. It could be. Yeah, sure. It could be true. It could be unknown. But that's not. That's the truth. That's the value to it. That's what we assign to it: true, false, or unknown. It's a 3-valued system.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the law of non-contradiction. Soundness would be whether a proposition is true or not.
But let's assume for arguendo that the laws of logic, and I hate calling them that because they're not laws, but just for right now, if they didn't exist, then
they're in mind and so on.
Then at some point, God had to exist them, did he not? Or he had to create them, did he not? Or they've been around forever?
Well, the apologists would argue that they're part of the nature of God because he's unchanging. He's something that is not himself.
I called backup. There's another Christian here. Craig's here.
I gotta kill the camera though before. Wow, that's painful. Okay, how do I turn you off? Okay, there we go. There we go. That's
so the laws of logic are incorporated in a deity, even though there are multiple systems called paraconsistent logics where those rules do not hold true. The law of contradiction doesn't have to hold true. None of those laws have to hold true. It's just in classical, it does.
So you think the law of non-contradiction could be false?
It's not applicable in certain types of logic. There's different types of logic out there. In paraconsistent or ditheism, you don't have to hold to those particular rules of logic. No.
Well,
all
what would be true? I'm actually not too familiar with those set of laws or descriptions, however you want to describe them.
There's three ones that people talk about the most, right? There's law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, and then there's the law of
identity.
Identity, self-identity. So when you have a system that uses all 3 of those, we call them the classical. And there's also another one, principle of sufficient reason is often called the 4th law of logic. But there are other forms of logic that don't use those. For example, like I said, the multi-valued form of logic excludes the principle of excluded middle. It doesn't have it. It doesn't exist in there. Because principle of excluded middle means something has to be true or false, right? But in other forms of logic, you can have true, false, or other, which means that what you call law is not really a law. It's just something we describe to a particular axiomatic system of logic. But if you don't use those axiomatic systems of logic and use some other form of logic, then it doesn't hold. There's nothing in the universe that's written. These are some kind of immutable things of the universe, is my point.
So did we make a determination yet whether or not a person can make a conscious decision as to what they believe?
I think no.
Oh, I think one can assent to a proposition being true or false. That's my whole premise here.
So you think that you can consciously say, even though I'm not compelled by it, I'm choosing to believe. I'm going to fake it till I make it.
Are you choosing that proposition though? That proposition right there. That if you're not compelled, can you be convinced by that? That's a proposition.
Right. Yeah.
So you choose that.
But faking it isn't believing. You still don't hold the belief. You're just faking it. You're
lying to yourself in the hopes that one day you'll convince yourself by virtue of acting out that lie.
I'm asking one of the propositions in your argument or question. I probably shouldn't call that an argument. Is
sure.
Is it true that someone can be, if someone is not convinced by something, can they believe it? And I think that's a proposition in itself. So my question would be, can you choose that to be true or not, or leave that in its sentence?
I don't believe that you can. Right. That's the whole crux of this, is that I don't think that
you can't believe something that you don't organically believe. That's what you're saying, right?
Right, exactly. Like I can't.
You'd be lying. You'd be deluding yourself to.
Right. Correct.
And the underlying, I'm guessing the underlying thing is you're applying it to Christianity. You could no longer keep pretending to believe what you actually no longer believe, right?
Right.
That's where this is coming from. Okay.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what I thought.
That's a fair representation in this instance. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
And
So-
I want to make clear too that this is this idea that you can choose your belief is not something that theists hold to, like as a matter of principle or something. I mean, Alvin Plantinga, who is regarded by many as being one of the greatest contemporary philosophers of religion, is a doxastic and voluntarist, right? He makes a distinction between doxastic and voluntarism and attitudinal involuntarism. So a cognizer or a knower, a believer, an agent can hold a positive propositional attitude toward the proposition, right? They hold the belief, but they can choose their attitudes about that belief, but they cannot be compelled otherwise other than to believe. They have no choice in their belief. And like I said, Plantinga is probably one of the greatest philosophers of our time with regard to philosophy of religion.
And when you're talking about propositional attitudes, you're talking literally about I believe X, I hate X, I love X, any kind of propositions toward or actual attitude toward the proposition with respect to the proposition, right?
Yeah, it's just that Plantinga wants
that
to
we can
make
choose in some regards.
Right,
we have some leeway there.
That's why Plantinga makes a distinction between attitudinal voluntarism and doxastic voluntarism.
Right, I agree. That makes sense.
I feel like Craig should have a chance to. He didn't get a chance to really address the question very much because I think Heather kind of addressed it for the most part and a little bit SJ and somewhat Tim, but I didn't hear much from you, Craig. I'm interested.
I want to say about that exchange between you and Heather, Shannon, that's the most aggressive that I've ever seen you go after somebody. And I was just,
really?
Well, whoa. Heather wasn't answering the question, really. I don't think she was understanding.
We only had a limited time. I couldn't mess around. There was only
you started pointing at the camera like you were going to
because I was tired of it being straw manned. I had read so many responses and listened to so many responses that were representing the question as something that it wasn't. They were representing it either as us not having the motivation that's required or us requesting evidence or critiquing the quality of the evidence.
Right. Well, Heather was giving you evidence. Heather was giving you evidence as like a presentation, like when she wasn't really answering the question as you were framing it.
Right.
Before I start, the overall conversation was actually pretty cool. If we could have just done the your last question and the first question, we didn't need to do like 5 of them. We could have done just those 2, and it would have been better in terms of having, because we all had a lot to say. I thought.
Well, it's not our show, so we didn't get to choose.
Right. I'm just saying.
And also everybody wanted to have an opportunity too. There was a lot of people that were involved in that. And I think based on the way that it was constructed, it was the most equitable way it could possibly have been done without it being like a 4-week-long series.
Yeah, thank you. And I think everybody did get their share. I mean, they got their saying. And
everybody behaved very well considering there was 17 of us.
17 of us all over the map. 17 of like the most varied
with
opinions.
Ocean in there, we had gone either way, right?
We had a Thor worshiper or something. What is? I don't even get it. Was it Odin or something? What's his deal?
He's here.
I'm right.
Oh, he
I'm
is
right
cool.
Here,
What's the deal? What is it?
I'm a Germanic polytheist. I believe in the old religions of Northern Europe.
Yeah, so that's like Thor and shit, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Do you play heavy metal by perchance?
I do not. I've listened to a lot of it. I'm a fan of 69 Eyes and the occasional metal band.
Okay.
But no, I'm not like a metalhead though.
I am.
Or not like a rivet head either.
There was a whole movement of like metal Thor based metal bands in
there's a
Northern
lot of
Europe.
them. There's a lot of good stuff. Some of them were interested in were really helpful in doing reclamation of symbols and stuff like that, like with the Tyr rune and several of the other runes that were used by Nazis. But
have you ever seen The Occult Roots of Nazism? The documentary on that?
There's a lot of Norse polytheism was in that, and I don't know about specifically the publication you're talking about, but the with Nazism there was a lot of Norse runes that were adopted, and heavy metal bands were instrumental in kind of like disassociating them from Nazism with pretty much all the symbols, with the exception of the black sun and the swastika, which are still like issues poison as far symbols. As the religion are concerned. Right. They're definitely poison symbols.
Craig, you have to answer the question still too. I'll let Ocean finish.
Yeah,
yeah, no tangent there, Ocean.
The Ocean effect just took place.
Yeah, where it's like, all right, wrench, boom,
Just-
into the
yeah,
conversation.
So
'Cause
Craig, I still want to hear your answer to the question. We went off on a side
Okay,
tangent.
so what?
You didn't-
So I'm not sure if the question. Okay, so let me rephrase the question again. I'm assuming you're asking in context of you deconverting from Christianity, right?
No, actually, Paul and I used ourselves as context, so that we wanted to establish we wanted to negate the possibility of people saying you didn't have the motivation, which is a risk because we did, and we also wanted people to not be able to say, well, you didn't try to look, because we did. So that was the preface to the question, was there for that purpose, to communicate that those two arguments were moot.
Right. The thing that I was trying to.
It's ultimately an argument, to my mind, and Paul has a slight difference of opinion about free will. What do I have a choice to believe in what I'm believing?
Well, you don't have the way you frame the question. No, obviously, you don't have a choice to believe against what you don't believe. I can't say, look, there's a dragon in the. What was it? Dragon in the garage? There's a dragon in the garage.
Yeah, that's Pine Creek Doug's favorite thing. Yeah, dragon in the garage.
Okay, but the other possibility is you might be mistaken in your belief. You may, honest to God, believe something that is 100% not true.
Absolutely, I acknowledge that.
And just because it is convincing doesn't mean it's true.
I agree.
It can. Now, here's one of the things with Christianity. There is a deliberate, whether it's deliberate or not, I don't know. This is just a speculative question. We don't have to debate it. There's a deliberate, I can be a perfectly reasonable person, right? And even the idea God exists is somewhat reasonable. I was intellectually convinced that God was real based on just reading a whole bunch of different stuff that we were talking about tonight, like Power Myth, William James, Tao Te Ching. But then when you start getting to the specifics of Christianity, it's not very plausible, correct? It's not what you're being asked to believe is not exactly plausible. It's not the most plausible of major world religions.
So if you talk
about
Christianity isn't the most plausible? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true. I have just never heard a Christian present that argument, so I was slightly taken aback. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing you correctly. Please continue.
Well, no, I've actually since we both agree on that, then I'll just go with it. Yes, it's probably the least plausible of major world religions. Deliberately, you have to believe the miraculous, correct? Right. You have to believe the miraculous in order to actually.
The resurrection, yes, that would be miraculous.
For example,
primary tenet, yes.
Okay, before I became a Christian, I became intellectually convinced that there was a God. Now, if you're just going on intellectual speculation, the most logical conclusion, at least according to me, was kind of like a Star Wars thing. God is some sort of benevolent life force that if you're a loving person, you can connect to. You know what? Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Seems a little Thomist to me, but yeah, sure.
But I'm just talking about, like, if you're just talking intellectually, reasoning about what a God would be. At least to me, that was the most intellectually plausible. Christianity isn't all that intellectually plausible.
No,
yeah. The main thing it's asking you to believe is miraculous.
Sure.
Correct.
I'm with you here. Yeah.
No complaints from anybody.
Okay.
Everybody's nodding in agreement.
Okay. Then we're on the exact same page. What you are supposed to be. What is supposed to be happening, and I will hopefully get to a place where I myself will be able to do this, but most Christians can't. They're firing blanks. Paul says, I came to you not with the arguments of man, not with the wisdom of men, but with demonstrations of the power of God. In other words, I'm not asking you to believe the miraculous. I'm showing you right here. Here's a miraculous deed right in front of your face. And then you don't deny the obvious. correct? That's how it's supposed to go down. It doesn't go down like that.
No,
it doesn't go. I'm not saying it goes down like that. I'm saying that's how it's supposed to go down. Are we still on the same page? If we're not on the same page, slow me down.
Actually,
Okay,
can I ask a question?
Oh,
sure.
So, whenever I ask, what would convince you that a God or Christianity is true, a lot of the time, it's if God came down from heaven himself and revealed himself, and what would you? My question would be: would you be absolutely convinced if that did happen?
Does it matter if you're absolutely convinced or just you believe it? Like, I have no problem believing something. If I see something and they say, "Hey, I'm Jehovah," I'd be like, "Okay, I'm believing it." If I'm wrong on that, so what? I don't have to be absolutely epistemically convinced that if I see some manifestation, I personally, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm cool with that. I'll believe it."
Right. That's kind of what I was saying. Yes, you're supposed to see some. If you saw some convincing manifestation of the power of God, you'd be like, "Okay, that guy's not firing blanks. That's something that really happened." And you might not completely believe that it's God, but you'd at least see.
It would put a chink in the armor of your preset. Yes, sure. It might be compelling enough that it could potentially change your mind, or at least lead you on a path towards changing your mind. Is that what you're suggesting?
Okay. That's exactly where I was going. Yes. So we're on the same page.
Why does the truth value matter to the fact that we don't choose our beliefs? It seems to be focusing on, well, the belief may not be true, or convincing evidence, which I think Shannon and Paul were trying to avoid those kind of things. The evidence and the truth value has nothing to do with it. It's the fact that we simply are unable to actually choose our beliefs. That's the foundation of it. You can't just say, I choose to believe X. No, you don't. Your brain puts all these things together, and then we formulate a belief. And as Michael pointed out earlier, you can have different propositional attitudes you can choose, but you don't ever choose your beliefs. I can't put a gun to your head and say, "Hey, you know what? You better believe in atheism right now." And you say, "You know what? I choose to believe in atheism." No matter what you say, your mind is still not believing atheism is true.
Right. We got to that with Heather. Like, could you choose to believe that you're an atheist? And no, you can't. You can't just be and just say, "Well, sure, I choose."
Well, when the Christian hears the question, and I'm the Christian, so I just hear it a little differently. I hear it as you're asking it. She hears it as, "Here's the evidence for God." I hear it as you're asking it, and you and I are on the same page. Now I got to produce miracles for you, and then you'll be like, "Okay, cool. Greg was telling the truth."
But that's you presupposing what would compel me, though. You're presupposing in this argument that if I saw a miracle, that would be compelling enough for me to change my mind. That's the logical conclusion from what you're suggesting would be the mechanism by which I change my mind. I can't say with any degree of certainty that would change my mind. I may be. John brought this up in the stream. Godless Engineer brought this up in the stream. He said, David Copperfield does magic all the time. I have reason to be skeptical when I'm presented with these things. Because illusions have tricked people.
Right, but I'm not talking about illusions. Steve brought this up. Right. And actually, Heather was almost on point there. Okay. Because she was saying an actual miracle, not this is somebody faking you out. This is somebody who did something miraculous right in front of you, and I'm not. What would that do to your? What would that do to your worldview? It would. If
I believed it was real.
If you kind of if you believed it was a real miracle. If I was fully invested, let's assume for argument's sake it's a real miracle. It's a real miracle. Argument's sake, just for argument's sake.
It could be a real miracle, and I could still not believe it, though.
Right, but then that's on you, isn't it?
She could attribute
is it on me?
That's right.
Of course it's on you, because then you're denying the truth. Then you're suppressing the truth.
Well, hang on. She doesn't choose.
Right. That's the point.
Presuppositions.
Okay.
Right?
Wow, God, you guys are good.
Well, hang on.
And by the way,
guys are good.
Craig, turning water into wine nowadays isn't as impactful as it would have been.
Yeah, it's nothing nowadays. I know kids today.
I could do that with chemistry set.
To be fair, if you could give me just an unlimited amount of wine, I might come to Jesus.
Jesus, thank you.
But even if see, the whole problem with this is, even if there's evidence, you're still not choosing to believe. You're either your brain tells you believe this or you don't. You're not making a choice about your beliefs either way. If your brain says this is enough evidence, hey Shannon, you believe now, then it's still dysastic and voluntarism. You still are not choosing your beliefs either way.
Well, but
I thought we were discussing philosophically, not like whether I'm just a brain or if I have a soul, which is a mind, and so on. I thought we were just discussing philosophically and so on.
Well, I mean that it all hinges on that, right? Because
that's
there's this idea.
Exactly.
Yeah,
this idea that
presupposing that we exist or I'm out. Like we're
presupposing. Yeah, I think we all presuppose we exist.
Oh, we exist.
Yeah,
I'm out. Exactly. When you get these conversations,
we're not full nihilists. We exist. There is a universe.
Assume that. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Prove it to me.
Ocean. How do you
wait? Why do you believe you exist?
No, it's not why. I'm just saying, for the sake of this conversation, we're all going to believe that we exist. We're going to have this conversation as if we exist.
I can actually answer this question. It's really simple. The reason I exist because it's self-refuting not to.
Why?
That
you have no mechanism to deny it.
Because if I do not exist, I cannot sit here and even question with my existence. So therefore, it's self-refuting.
I don't think that I exist, so I'm out of this conversation, even if I participate.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
No.
Well, what I wanted to say earlier was that Shannon's not choosing her presuppositions, right? Like I tend to fall on evidentialist theories of epistemic justification, right? And the reason why I privilege evidentialism as a theory of justification is because I can't help but be compelled by those arguments that are made under that theory of justification, right? So it's just kicking the can down the road. If the rational agent can't choose their belief, right, then they can't help they can't choose what compels them to believe either. Right?
But Michael, do you do that with the forsaking all other epistemic types of justification?
No,
because I'm fine with an evidential epistemological approach, but you can't just eliminate things like prudentialism or pragmatism or anything like that. Those are also
translate this into human from like.
I have not talked to Michael in like
cyborg
years.
From like cyborg language. Thank God you said it.
But so to make sure that I'm translating this into colloquially, ubiquitously understandable language. I don't think that I have the option to choose in any situation what I'm going to be compelled by. I do have the option to choose what situations I put myself in. And to choose.
Okay, that's big though. That's big.
Right. I get that. I have to acknowledge that for this argument to make sense. I have no intention of being anything but objective in this scenario. Because I'm interested in the answer to the question.
Okay, but you're actually being objective. A lot of people say I have no intention of being objective and then aren't. You are actually being objective.
Right.
Yes. You don't have choice.
Truth, which is what I'm interested in.
If we're taking it back to the Christian thing, okay, you can make choices that are either going to, let's assume for argument's sake I'm telling the truth. And let's make it the dragon in the garage just to be perfect.
There's a dragon in my garage, and it is Craig making his.
I've seen the dragon.
My favorite one of those is the cast of Rambo is in this door behind me, and they want to take me on a magic marshmallow ride. Now, do you believe that?
I want to, but I also want to hear what Craig was about to say. So go ahead, Craig.
Okay, so let's assume I went to the garage. I saw a dragon. Yeah, it's fantastical, but it's there, and I saw it. Right. Now, I want you to know that there's a dragon in the garage. Now, God, it gets weird to make this Christian metaphor, but there are choices you can make from this point forward. Mm-hmm. We're assuming I'm telling the truth. We're assuming there's a dragon in the garage. And let's assume this dragon's going to give you eternal life.
Eternal life dragon. All right, I'm with you.
We're going down a weird rabbit hole. Let's do it.
Well, you're going to take me to the garage to show me that dragon because that's going to give me.
Well, but if we're making it a Christian analogy, there's certain methodological way, and there are choices you personally or Shannon. Sorry, I called you Heather. Can make from this point forward, where you're either going to be more likely to find out that I'm telling the truth or less likely to find out that I'm telling the truth.
Right.
And like, You can
and
reinforce your
making those choices. Sure.
Exactly. And you can reinforce your non-belief.
You could come up to me and you could say, there is a dragon that grants magic wishes in my garage. Come see it. And I could choose to say, let's go see this friggin' dragon. Or I could choose to say, you're bananas. Get away from me. Right? I could make any one of those two choices. Sure.
Right. And how you walk.
Let's say I make the choice to go see the dragon with you.
Then cool. Then we're good. Okay. Then you're part of my church.
Once I
then give me your tithes and give me your money, and then you're part of my church. Give me your money and give me your money.
Okay, but this is the crux. This is what it boils down to, though. So we've gone to the garage, and there is a dragon there. Now, that in this scenario, the fact that I can see it and sense it is sufficient enough information, I would think, for me to change my mind, because that is, it's tangible. It's tangible.
Correct.
So
okay, but that's what I'm telling you happened to me when I went to church.
But that's fine. Let Jennifer.
That's what. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say is that's where the scenario, the analogy kind of falls apart for me here, is because at that point it becomes tangible. And based on my experience in the past, when something is tangible for me, when I can physically touch it and test it and interact with it, and I have no realistic reason to reject it as a reality, then usually, in my experience, I won't reject it as a reality. Now, the proposition we're discussing is God, who is an intangible. So the evidence required for me to be compelled is significantly different, right? And also, I would argue, less in my control, because what we're talking about is an intangible, somewhat of a construct. He's a mental construct that fits many different definitions for many different people. So I don't know what would compel me.
And also, all you've done on this, you haven't changed the conversation. All you've done is you've made the person convinced. Like, you've just talked about a scenario where someone became convinced, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a scenario where someone is not convinced. Like, changing the level of, like, all of a sudden you started arguing about what level would convince you. Well, that's irrelevant to the original question we were asking. You've now just shown Shannon enough to meet her burden of proof. Great. Lovely. But what if, so the dragon's not there when he comes back? Or like, whatever. Like, you have to, in order for this scenario to continue out, you have to be talking about something where the level of burden of proof is still not met for the individual you're talking about.
Well, the burden of proof is something you own for a claim, not somebody else's. Shannon,
I'm not suggesting that it is anybody else's, though. I'm asking whether or not it's a mechanism I have control over.
You have control over how you act from the information you have been given in life. You have control of the decisions you make regarding that information. Now, you have competing claims. You got people telling you God exists. Okay, we'll take it out. If the dragon in the garage doesn't work, we'll take it back into the actual Christianity. Sure. You got competing claims.
Sure.
You got this really, really good holy man, Craig, this really nice guy telling you that
like
Jesus
Craig.
We'll follow you anywhere.
Telling you that God is real and that there are at least some parts of the Bible that are speaking the truth. At least some. I'm not going to tell you go any further than that. Then you have other people saying, no way. God isn't real. It's all a myth. It's all fairy tales.
Sure.
Now, see, this gets really complicated. I mean,
it is. It's not an easy question.
Well, that's why it's, you can take the question to just try and fall into standard Christian apologetics, or you can take the question as real. There are two things that get talked about in the Bible. Okay. There's one part in Romans where they say you do know, that everybody knows, and you now automatically, I'm talking to atheists. You don't believe that. You don't accept that. Then there's another part in the Bible where Paul says, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance. So that implies there's at least a lot of things you don't actually know. There's a lot to this story. There's more to this story than meets the eye, and there's more to the story of what has got you to where you are today in terms of your belief system and your worldview, then is consciously available to us, correct? I mean, there's a lot of different...
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I know a lot of Christians that don't think Romans in any way applies to atheists. They're adamant about that. They think that even a lot of Christians are misreading Romans, because Romans 1, he's talking to a very specific church in Rome, a very a small sect of it that has fallen away, that had originally had known God and that no longer knows God, and that they think that people that are trying to use Romans to say, well, everybody knows God exists, including atheists. That's a misapplication of Romans from the Christian perspective.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
In Corinth, the church in Corinth.
It was addressed to the church in Rome.
But not to apply to all people.
Well, they were discussing whether Gentiles could be Jews, or are they part of the new covenant, which would apply overall to the whole Gentile world and so on. And that was the dispute in the church, of course, but that was a theological dispute, and that's why.
Well, I mean, the only important part for the purpose of this conversation is it goes on to say that there are people who are actively suppressing the truth. Okay, there are atheists who are operating with integrity, correct? They're operating according to what they actually know to be true, given the information they have, correct?
I am filled with integrity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Sean's going, hey, I actually believe in God, but I'm just going to tell people I don't.
Well, but then there are atheists who are lying.
There's Christians who are lying too, though. I really
totally
hate that identity. Identifying anybody as ubiquitous based on how they self-identify, because that's a dangerous game. It's a really dangerous game, because you can attribute any personality trait to somebody belonging to any group almost unilaterally. So the statement is almost always true, but almost never valuable.
But is he saying that there's some atheists that are lying about being atheists when they're actually believers?
No, they're covering up information that would help you to make a more reasonable conclusion.
Well,
and they're covering up that
without inferring their intentions. Though.
Yeah,
that's
they could just be bad arguments.
The opportunity, I think, not so much whether you would be convinced or not. I think I think Shannon presupposed, for the sake of argument, that we could choose our opportunities and so on. I think Romans 1:2 would just apply to that.
Yeah, I think.
So, Craig, for example, like when Saul was persecuting Christians,
acted in ignorance.
Well, but he was he was acting honestly. I think you would agree, right? He was acting.
That's what the Bible says. He was acting in ignorance. Shown mercy because I acted in ignorance. Right. That's the actual words of Paul.
He was not convinced. It's not like he was suppressing the truth of Jesus. He received evidence. He received evidence later that got him there.
That overwhelmed and totally God's sovereign. Yes, that's a great point. That's a great point, because I've brought that up 100 times when atheists say, like, is it fair that I don't know, and supposedly God is going to hold me accountable for what I don't know? Well, let's take the Apostle Paul. Paul was acting in ignorance, and he was doing what he had the information available to him, and he was doing it passionately and convinced that he was doing the right thing. And then God sovereignly introduced himself and said, hey, cut the crap. I'm actually Jesus. You're persecuting me. And Paul's like, oh, okay, I'm in now. I would assume if God overrid all of your senses and came, appeared in your bedroom tonight and said, by the way, I'm real, follow me, most of you would go, okay, I'm in, correct?
Well, if God overrode our senses, we'd have no.
Yes, if he made if he did what he did to the Apostle Paul, he just sovereignly appeared and said, look, Shannon, I love you, but this atheism thing, it's got to end. Here I am, I'm actually God.
Could Paul say that he was hallucinating, though?
Yeah, I'm actually there. If God did that, if I had the Damascus Road experience, I would assume it was a hallucination. So I'll be honest about that.
Yeah, that was my point from before, because if that's going to be your standard of evidence.
But if it's God, he could override your senses and say, "Hey, Paul, you no longer have the sense to think it's a hallucination."
Well, then it's not free will, of course.
Well,
no, because Satan and the demons get to have all the proof they need that God exists. They have all absolute proof, and they can still choose to reject him.
True. That's
so
true.
There's no
exactly
that argument does not fly.
Believing whether God or God does not exist, they can reject, not put his faith in it.
It's called perfect knowledge, JMD. Though,
so God giving me perfect knowledge does not wreck my free will.
Well, God, obviously, God does not believe anything because he would be omniscient. So, if you're omniscient, then I would agree. Free will, as in whether you would be convinced that God or God does not exist, or whether you would place your trust in him or not. In the sense,
and overriding, like God overrides my ability to, like, I have to believe that gravity. God has not given me the ability to doubt gravity.
Right.
Like you can go you can go up and down that argument. That's ridiculous.
But let's say God gave Paul perfect knowledge. He has the same knowledge Satan has. Satan was able to say, you know what, God, screw you. So Paul still has the free will to do that. So giving him perfect knowledge doesn't eliminate his free will. God knows how to give perfect knowledge, would he not?
Well, I'm a monist, and in the sense of whether let me see here. Are you asking to believe whether he exists or just to want to follow him or whatnot?
Well, you said you talked about
then obviously, I'll agree with you that if you were omniscient of the fact that God exists, then obviously there's no possibility of you being wrong. So I don't think there would be any possibility of you not being convinced.
Well, I think you're missing again. He's convinced. He knows God exists at this point. He has epistemic certainty. He has perfect knowledge of God's existence. He can still say, I choose
I think
not
convinced
to follow
is
you.
the wrong term there then, because I think convinced is you're most likely, like you would know for a fact.
If I'm convinced, that means I believe.
That's why I cashed out belief earlier in a positive propositional attitude, right? What's a proposition, right? And all you have to say that somebody believes is that they hold a positive propositional attitude.
Yeah, I don't think Satan believed that God did exist. I think he knew.
No, but you have to believe to have knowledge. You cannot say I know something and not believe it. It doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the conditions for knowledge is that you believe the proposition is true.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Well, no, I think you're equivocating knowledge now, because knowledge could be.
No, definitely not.
Like, I can't not believe that I exist and know that I exist.
Yeah,
it's one of those contradictions that you were talking about earlier.
Knowledge is a subset of belief. Knowledge entails belief. So if you know something, you at the same time are saying you also believe it. You cannot have knowledge without belief. You can have belief without knowledge. I can say I believe X, but I don't know X is true. But I can't say I know X is true and not believe X is true.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
any theory of knowledge you look at will have the tripart, three things. P has to be true, S has to believe P, and it has to be either justified or some kind of reliably produced truth process, actually. Some reliably produced. I believe more in reliably truth.
And the crux of this whole conversation is that the subject has no control over what convinces them or compels them, right? Those things that justify the proposition, right? So, or those things that convince the cognizers that they believe it, the agent has no control over that. And that's the topic of conversation here. And then the other interesting point is whether or not the person is responsible for that. Right? And if it's not determined, then they can't be held accountable for it.
And that second part is
that is one of the better summations I've heard of the question.
That's a really good way of doing it.
Denying an opportunity or not following an opportunity, I think.
But
wait.
If you had the opportunity to study the evidence, or
no. That's a normative claim, right? There are no facts of the matter about these normative claims, right? So if there's some sort of epistemic responsibility, some sort of duty or obligation that you have, right? Like I talked about deontological theories of justification, such that the subject is justified in believing the proposition if they have no reason to refrain from believing it, and they have met their obligations in seeking out defeaters. What that means absolutely nothing, because we can't define what those obligations and duties are objectively. These are subjective things. The thing that might convince Steve, right? The sort of defeasibility that would provide a defeater for a belief that Steve has is not the same kind of defeasibility that would provide a defeater for the same belief for me, right? And it's in virtue of that there's no fact of the matter, that the agent can't be responsible epistemically. If they can't be responsible epistemically for the beliefs, then they can't be responsible metaphysically.
That's
exactly.
I couldn't even say that any better. That's just bravo. I mean, that's literally the whole argument and the crux of the matter right there.
Summed up our question, I think.
Let's say you had the opportunity to, study apologetics, but you don't. Well, would you not be able to have you had the opportunity to learn better? I may have missed your point. I may be repeating myself, and you may have answered it. I'm willing to admit that, but would you not be able to be held accountable? Since would that not be willfully ignorant in that sense? No, well, you guys have some apologetics and so on.
Well, I would ask you, in virtue of what is that rational agent responsible?
Not of being willful, having the opportunity to study more whether God exists or not.
Well, let's
say let's just say that this rational agent has access to these things that may provide a defeater, right? But it's in virtue of their ontology or something, right? Like they don't think to do this, right? They don't control their thoughts, right? They don't think their thoughts before they have them, and they don't choose their thoughts, right? So there's something that's out of their control that's preventing them from exploring the sort of defeasibility that would provide a defeater for that belief. Right? So I would then ask you, if that's the case, in virtue of what is the rational agent responsible for their believing or not believing a proposition?
If you're consciously able, like the thought came up, I think you can choose between your thoughts, not necessarily. Like if you lived, like this would come to the question about what about those who have never heard, the gospel and whatnot, and that would be Romans 1 and 2. Whether that's true or not, that would be the answer to that question, I think.
No, you're missing the whole thing. So we're talking about people with equal access to the same information.
Yeah,
they have 100% the same information. They have studied every same. They were sitting together side by side for every lesson. They read every same book. We're talking about the same people with the same information, and one person is convinced and the other is not.
I'm talking about whether you have the possibility. If you have the information but you don't study it, then I would say you could.
What if you studied it but it didn't compel you?
Yeah, JMD, what happens if you and Shannon both had same exact access to everything, the information you both have, but Shannon, just for whatever reason, has a different conclusion and you have a different conclusion?
Then we'll just have to talk about epistemology in general, I think.
But is God going to say, hey, look Shannon had all the same information. Her mind has said, I don't believe. Because again, I don't think she chose to say, I don't believe. Why is she responsible for that? Why is God going to punish her for that? I think that is the whole core of this. Why is she being punished if her brain is saying, I don't believe, even though I've been looking at this information? I want to know this. I'm a non-resistant non-believer. I've looked actively for this. And I know Shannon has. I know Paul has. I mean, they've talked about it numerous times. So if they've looked into it and fairly and honestly looked into it, then how can God fault them for it?
Well, there would always be consequences for being wrong, but at the same time, I get what you're saying, and that's a good question I have to think about. I'll be willing to admit I haven't really thought about that much because now I understand the question more.
Awesome.
Well,
that's great.
I utterly respect that.
I love that answer. Actually, to be honest with you,
John's fabulous.
I would just have to look into it more. But on the flip side, I mean, if you had an opportunity in the past or whatnot, or again, it would come down to whether God exists or not, and then we would have to talk about. We would have to be willing set aside any presupposition or biases, and have an open mind and talk about it, of course. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that would be my point.
And I'd welcome you back to do it again. Absolutely, at any time if you've had some time to. Always reach out to me. And I respect you coming here. I didn't intend for you to be this outnumbered. Craig's here.
They handled it pretty well.
I'm here. Yeah, he's not outnumbered.
Yeah.
He has like 48 dogs.
Shannon,
not special little snowflakes.
Right? There's only 2 atheists, maybe 3 in this room. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, it's fair. Well, there's
I'm the one that's
agnostic. We've already established that.
48 is for amateurs.
Ocean's the most outnumbered always.
That's right. I didn't mean to limit you, Ocean. I'm sorry.
I may be outnumbered, but my gods outnumber all yours. So.
Oh, that's fair. You know what?
Your
gods definitely outnumber mine. By
our
exponential.
gods each maximally great beings.
Oh God!
You want to get into that? We can get into that.
No, I have to go. We've reached, I think, the end at this point. So I think thank you everybody for coming, and thank you chat for joining in. Everybody except Godless Cranium. Nobody invited you. I'm just saying. I see.
Is he in the chat?
Why?
Is he really?
He is in there. Yeah.
You just treat him so bad sometimes.
Godless
Cranium, I love you,
brother and sister. It's horrifying, actually. We can't talk to each other without being sarcastic. That's the only way we know how to engage each other.
It's their love language, sarcasm. Yeah.
If we say something nice to each other, we both immediately get uncomfortable.
What?
Like, I don't know what to do with this information. So thank you, chat, and thank you, everybody. And we will see you next time. Maybe I'll even make a video. I'm supposed to this week. I don't know. I'll try. Oh, and thank you for. I'm
so
really
committed.
close to 2,000 subs. Thanks. I don't know why, but thank you. That's awesome. Yay.
If anybody cares, by the way, Aravine Beauchamp, she's going to be having a hangout tonight on the Great Debate Community channel called How to Talk to a Trans Woman 101, if anybody's interested.
That is great. And if anybody hasn't, I'm going to, after this hangout is over, I'm going to get links from everybody. If you could just DM them to me, and I will put them in the description. They will hopefully be there within the next 15 minutes to half an hour once I accumulate them. So I'll put the Great Debate Community link in there. So people should be able to go there and find that hangout if you guys are interested in more interesting conversations. So thanks, chat. Thanks, guys. And thanks, people. Thanks, future people as well. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.